might recognize where I'm standing right now, this famous landmark. It's so beautiful, the Garden of the Gods, a soaring, famous Colorado location, is well known for its stunning scenery. The landscape of the majestic mountains and painted-looking sky is the perfect place to have a discussion about a big God who knows the vastness of the world and equally, intimately, each and every one of us. It's also a great place to start our session one discussion about how in that big world we can often feel lost and forgotten, and how what we really long for in that space is to feel known. I'm Lisa Whittle, and welcome to the Your God Knows study. For 6 sessions, we will dive into 6 crucial questions for an omniscient God. We will take a close look into the obscure book of the minor prophet Nahum, as well as other places in the Old Testament and some in the New, to gain greater understanding for how God's omniscience plays into our biggest daily concerns. I've learned so much myself in studying this for the past years. What a journey we were about to go on. I cannot wait to share it with you. And by the way, if you're wondering what omniscience means, it's the technical theological term for this simple definition: God's intimate knowledge of things past, present, and future, which is why it's especially important to kick off this study with the first crucial question in this big world. Am I forgotten? Feeling known is something we all want, right? You might not want to be known as in a quest to be notable or famous, but you certainly wouldn't be out of place in this culture if you did. There are a lot of us looking for a quick way to get more people to notice us so we can feel less lonely and maybe, yes, known. The problem is being known doesn't work like that. The word known means something familiar or studied. We may get people to notice us. They may know who we are by something we do or by our reputation or our name. But how much have they studied the intimacies of our life? Do they see us when we struggle or just when we smile? Do they know what burdens our heart? Truth is, no matter who in this world we feel knows us, or if we feel there is no one, there is only really one who knows exactly who we are, who knows our fears even when we don't speak them, who knows what we think about what we never say, who knows how close we are to calling it quits, who knows what makes our heart leap with joy and break with sorrow. My God, your God, the God of the universe. He knows me, He knows us, He knows you. Your God knows every worry and question you have. And for the next 6 sessions, we will explore some of our main questions and what an omniscient God has to say about them. You ready? Let's go. I'll never forget sitting in a circle on the floor with a group of women some years ago and asking them this question: what is the greatest need of your heart right now? We went around the circle with each woman answering the question one by one until I got to Holly, a darling young woman with big brown eyes. I noticed that with every answer, bigger and bigger tears were forming in those eyes until when we got to her eyes suddenly couldn't hold those big tears any longer, and they came tumbling out as she said these 3 unforgettable words: I feel forgotten. The room was eerily quiet. This may sound strange, but I can distinctively remember a fly buzzing around the room, but it seemed like no one had the strength or the desire to kill it because we all just let it keep flying around. Someone let out a sound that was like an ugh of understanding. Then came the nods of yes, me too, from others sitting nearby. It was like Holly had outed everyone's worst kept secret. We all felt, at least at some point in our life, forgotten. Perhaps the most tender of all secrets, forgotten by God Himself. Holly had just had the courage to say it. We start out with the question this week in session 1, am I forgotten? Because especially in difficult times in life, this becomes perhaps the most pressing question on our hearts. See, what happens is when hard times come into our life, we begin to assume God has forgotten us based on our circumstances. This then ironically causes us to forget 2 things. Number 1, we forget who God is. Our feelings drive this. And number 2, we forget who we are. Culture influences this. Holly's family had gone through some very difficult things. Her home had been flooded, so her husband, herself, and their 3 small children had not only lost their home, but they had to move into another family's basement where they had been living for over a year. Her husband was out of work and couldn't get a job no matter how hard he tried. One of their children had just been diagnosed with a serious illness. Things looked terrible, and the circumstances of their life were telling them that everyone else had it better. Culture was saying, you deserve more. You're not loved. You'll have to make your own happiness happen for yourself in a way you can find to do it because you're your own salvation. Where is your God now? Can you hear the cultural lies? Can you hear Satan's lies in that? Their hard circumstances were also leading them to forget who God was. Things didn't feel good. That was real. Therefore, feelings could conclude God isn't good. God doesn't love you. God doesn't have good things for you. He won't make a way. Your prayers don't matter. You aren't seen. You are forgotten. Feelings that might well feel true in a moment of pain in a hard circumstance, but we know according to the Word of God are not true. And we also know are not good for being in the driver's seat of our heart and life. You see, when we feel forgotten, which is a human emotion that happens to all of us at times, and when culture rallies us to support the trust of our circumstances over the trust we have in God, we are faced with a choice. We can believe who God is based on what we know to be true about Him, which we'll talk more about in a minute, resulting in becoming settled and secure, yes, even in the midst of difficulty. Or we can turn from Him to believe lies and try to handle things ourselves, which leads us into what I call a cycle of control. A cycle of control looks like this. We feel overlooked or forgotten as we believe those cultural lies, which say we are our own producer of help or hope or joy, or our feelings make us pull away from God. And so then we take on personal measures to feel seen or trust ourselves or our emotions over truth. This is that control moment, which then produces more feelings of inadequacy, because as we know and have experienced, human measures are never enough, which leads then to feelings of desperation or loneliness or isolation, causing us to feel unseen. This cycle is a familiar one, isn't it? A lot of us have gone this road. This can feel good and even relieve some pressure for a time, but ultimately, it's a cycle that never leads to contentment, peace, comfort, or relief. That, my friend, only comes from trusting God. Have you ever been in a situation where things looked one way, but more was going on behind the scenes than what you knew? Welcome to the short 3-chapter book of Nahum, a book of prophetic poems written by the prophet Nahum to chronicle the oppression of the Judean people by the Assyrian nation, and more specifically, the Ninevites. Now, if your ears perked up when I just said Ninevites, it might mean that you're a Bible school or church girl and recognize the name Nineveh from the Bible story of Jonah and the whale. Yes, it is the same Nineveh, and we'll get to that connection to the Nahum story later in another session. But what you need to know now is that the book of Nahum is not exactly what it seems. Yes, it is full of strong language to the Ninevites, telling them of the trouble they are in to afflict God's chosen people. No, there aren't many verses that are super fun to read. But as with everything with God and His Word, there is much more to the story than our human minds can even understand. Because underlying all of that is a tender promise to Judah that their God knows what is happening, that He sees it all, that He is not woefully unaware of their troubles. And in the end, He will make things right. Not only was that a powerful message for Judah, but I cannot think of a more powerful message than that one for today, for what we are all going through, for the injustices we see in this world we cannot reconcile, for the worries we have and the problems we cannot solve. To know that they have not escaped God's attention, that's crucial. Let me dial it back for a minute and give you a quick bit of scriptural context, since we will be studying Nahum as well as other minor prophets and biblical stories throughout. In 1 Kings 11, God split Israel into two kingdoms, the northern and the southern kingdoms. As time passed, Assyria conquered the northern kingdom and named Nineveh the capital. After Jonah had reluctantly warned these idolatrous evil people to return to God more than 100 years before, and they had repented, they had since fallen back into their wickedness and were now in Nahum's time more sinful than ever. God was obviously grieved and displeased with this. He would not tolerate their evil deeds, though they seemed to be getting away with their behavior once again. God knew, God saw, and God would avenge their acts perpetrated against the Judeans. And so God gives Nahum a vision of Assyria's fall to Babylon. The vision includes a message for the remnant of God's people in Judah, those who had been faithful and so desperately needed to believe and hang on. Listen to Nahum 1, 12 through 13 and verse 15. This is what the Lord says. Though the Assyrians have many allies, they will be destroyed and disappeared. Now I will break the yoke of bondage from your neck and tear off the chains of Assyrian oppression. Look, a messenger is coming over the mountains with good news. He is bringing a message of peace. Celebrate your festivals, O people of Judah, and fulfill all your vows, for your wicked enemies will never invade your land again. They will be completely destroyed. This remnant, a faction of faithful believers that remain, has lived in oppression. They're not sinless, but their God has not forgotten them. Nahum in his vision sees a messenger coming with good news, a message of peace. And this is incredible news for hurting people. The yoke of bondage and oppression will be removed. I'm sure if Nahum and friends had been sitting around a circle during this time, and I would have asked them, what's the greatest need of your heart right now? Surely someone would have answered a whole lot like Holly. Surely they felt forgotten by God. It looked like God was gone even though God was there. This is so true to what we often feel and see too. But let me tell you something, friend. Your God wasn't gone then, and He isn't gone now. He knows you. He loves you. He sees you. You are not forgotten, and you never will be. Can I ask you a question? What is the greatest need of your heart right now? Think about it for a minute. Pause this and pray on it if you need. I can tell you that 5 years ago, a great need I had was to get over the fear that gripped me every night I went to sleep. I was experiencing such terrible night terrors. That was really why I started studying Nahum in the first place. I was waking up in the middle of the night, sweating, heart racing, scared to death about the world, my world, the future, wanting to make everything right. I couldn't. And during that time, the Lord spoke to me while I was in church, and He said this, I want you to read the book of Nahum. I had no idea what that meant. It made no sense to me at the time, but I went home, I read it, I reread it, and I read it again. And then I ordered every commentary I knew to get since it didn't make sense to me. And the first thing I found in my research was that the name Nahum means literally comfort and relief. Now that puzzled me even more because to read this book, it felt anything but comforting. But I was only reading what I saw on the surface. God knew the subplot of the larger story like He always does. Listen, friend, God knows the subplot of your life too. Maybe you've read Psalm 139. We know that this psalm supports the supreme attributes of God, omniscience in verses 1 through 6 and omnipresence in verses 6 through 12. Consider what David wrote, even as he was faced with falsehoods. You have searched me, Lord, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. David didn't write this under sweet and easy conditions. He was not devoid of problems. Rather, he was living in the reality of life, as are we. And yet, he knew in his core that God had not forgotten him. Why? How? Because he knew that God knew him. Remember what he then wrote? Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you're there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. Oh yes, friend. God knew David. He knew Judah. Your God knows you too. There's nowhere you can go to flee from his presence. There's nowhere you are not seen by God. What is the greatest need of your heart right now? He already knows it. A creator could never forget anything he created. A sustainer who even right now keeps your very heart in your chest beating and breath in your lungs. Oh no, friend. No matter how it looks, your God will never forget you.